Photographer of the Year. Let's hear it for Dan Shelley, Shellda Photos.
Courage in my veins, running uphill, a wildfire heart that never stays still. I was born with a spark my daddy couldn't kill.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Shellda podcast, the first official episode of 2026. So happy new year, and thank you for sticking around. You know, this first year of 2025 of doing this podcast was just, man, there was just so much learning and so much that going into the realm of, starting and hosting and creating a podcast. It just taught me so many different lessons. And one of the big things I think that we'll touch on in this episode that I took away was just the power of vulnerability and how that kept showing up throughout the year. And so for this episode, to start the year off and to kick the year off, what I want to do is I want to go through 8 different points of different reflections. So I want to look back at last year, and I'm going to open up and talk about some things that I've learned, some things that went well, some things that didn't go well, and then of course, just like a lot of New Year's traditions around this time of the year, look forward to what this year is going to look like and what the changes are going to be for me in this podcast, because there are definitely some changes on the way. And so, the first thing that I'll like to dive into is, hey, super quick, I want to interrupt myself and talk about some amazing sponsors that I have. I think it's no surprise now that I've had BFPGear, Hormesis, and ProDNA have all signed back on for the 2026 season. And I just couldn't be more excited to be working with 3 brands that I value so much and I look at as family members. First and foremost, BFPGear just came off literally an iconic, epic year of having not only being a sponsor of San Diego Dynasty and being a sponsor of Paintball Fit, but the holiday sale that they just got done wrapping up a few weeks ago, there's nothing like it. And the work that Junior and Gina put on to do all of the giveaways and do that crazy big holiday sale is just unreal. And I've had so many people reach out to me in the last week saying, hey, I got BFPGear gift cards for Christmas. And it's just so cool, right? Because now all of those people, kids and adults, get to go shopping on BFPGear for some just new gear, right? For this new 2026 season. So if you got gift cards, head over to bfpgear.com and use them. And if you didn't get gift cards, well, go spoil yourself and go over to bfpgear.com and grab some new gear. And then, of course, as you see, if you're watching on YouTube, partnering with ProDNA, we've got some absolutely amazing things planned for this year. I don't know if I'm allowed to tease this or not, so sorry, Travis and the crew over at ProDNA, but we've got some new drops that we're going to be teasing throughout the year. Partnering with ProDNA, we're working on some new merchandise, some new collaborations between my brand and the ProDNA brand. And I've seen some of the early concepts and these are things that are going to sell out really fast. So I am truly excited to work with ProDNA throughout this year. As soon as I announced it a few weeks ago that I was bringing the brand over to ProDNA, I just had so many people reach out and saying, thank you so much. I love ProDNA. Their gear is top quality. And that's one of the reasons why I brought my brand over is I really hold value in high quality, top quality products. And the gear that I've tested for ProDNA, their playing hoodie, their pads, their pants with the new reinforced knees, that's the type of gear that I want to surround myself with. In the meantime, if you're a new team and you're looking to bring your team and your brand over to ProDNA, head over to the link down below. I'll have it in the description. And let's get your team hooked up with some pretty awesome ProDNA gear. Okay, thanks to my sponsors, and back to the episode. Going into this episode, and going into all of my episodes, I've got a note that I have for every single episode that I'm usually preparing a week or two in advance, whether I'm bringing a guest on or I'm doing a solo show. I start to write out what the questions are and what topics I want to address. How do I want to address them? What are ways I can frame the question That way it's engaging for the not for the customer, engaging for the guest. And when I was going into this one, because I've been working on this particular episode for a few weeks, I really wanted to make sure I was setting the tone for 2026. Um, Something that kept coming back to me was it's going to be the first topic that we're going to talk about, and it's why 2026 is going to be the line in the sand for me. And so, what I mean by that, and I'll break it down to some different subpoints here, is this year is going to be a little different intentionally. And what I mean is, what I'm no longer going to do is I'm no longer going to be chasing metrics. I'm no longer going to be chasing, approval, like external approval. On the something I've learned on the photo side of my brand, the Shellda photo side, is I used to really live and die on if a player or a brand or a team accepted my collaboration. Um, I think doing a lot of reflecting this past year and writing the book and journaling a lot, I put so much of my self-worth and my own validation on somebody else if they chose to do something. And there were definitely moments where, I thought I had like an incredible picture or something, and maybe it was a team or a player or a brand didn't accept the collaboration. I thought, well, wait, like maybe this isn't a good photo, or maybe something's off here. And during the reflection in the past few weeks and, writing, that taught me that something that could bring me so much joy, I am putting so much pressure on everybody else of they are the ones that have to give me happiness and they are the ones that have to fulfill my happiness. And so working through some of that stuff and really sort of breaking those conditions, it's really unlocked a lot of kind of like oh shit, I've put a lot of my own self-love and growth on other people. And so for 2026, that is something that's going to be towards the top of my list of things that I'm going to be focusing on not doing. If there is a picture that I post and somebody doesn't accept the collaboration on it, that's your choice for whatever reason. There's no hard feelings. But I really need to stop putting my own validation on somebody else validating me back. And so that's one of the things I'm, drawing a line in the sand with, I guess you can say. And I think the second piece is what I'm committing to for myself for this podcast. And that's going to be to find stories that I connect with, that knowing my audience a little bit, knowing all of you listening, knowing stories that I think you'll also connect with. And what I mean by that, to break that down, is, throughout this year, I've had so many people approach me all over the country, at different NXL events, at local events here in Texas, at my local fields here in Texas. And I've just had so many nice conversations about how somebody listens to this podcast because they're a truck driver and they're driving across country or they're driving across the state. And they look forward to this particular podcast because it, one, helps them, stay awake. It helps them stay engaged while they're driving. And then, I've also heard people that they have really long work days where they're, sitting at a desk behind a computer, and maybe they're in an office setting, or they're just have a desk job and it's kind of mundane or boring. And so they always look forward to Tuesdays when this comes out because it helps them get through that day a little bit more. And so I've realized that, it doesn't necessarily have to be the flashiest guest. It doesn't have to be the top people in paintball. I think what I've learned is, while that's great and that definitely helps, get a little boost in the channel, but I think what that has taught me is the power of a story and the power of an individual's story, right? I think a lot of people listen to, I would assume, the top few podcasts. If you listen to other podcasts, right, like Joe Rogan or, Diary of a CEO or some of the other top ones. And it doesn't really matter who Joe brings on. You're watching because you enjoy Joe as a host. And if he happens to bring somebody on that you like, it's like a double whammy, like it's an extra thing, but you're probably still going to listen to those episodes, and then you're going to learn something about that guest and hear a cool story. And so that's taught me a lot going into 2026. I really want to take the pressure off of myself of it has to be, a well-known person or no one's going to watch it. Because when in reality, everyone's story is worth telling out there. And so, for 2026, I really want to focus on, of course, bringing on the stars and the legends in our game that are willing to share and open up about their stories. But I also want to continue to sprinkle in some people that are, either behind the scenes or they help drive paintball in some way that we just don't know about. So this year for me, it's not about growth for growth's sake, if that makes sense. Going into 2025, when I started the podcast, just like anything, I wanted to be successful at it. And a few episodes in, I thought, man, maybe this could be the number one podcast. Maybe this could overtake Play the Game. Maybe this could be the best podcast in paintball. And while I still think that's true, I've done some kind of reshuffling of my own priorities, and I've lowered that. And the reason for that is, for anyone that is a creator or has a YouTube channel, there's an application called YouTube Studio that shows you all of your metrics, shows you views in real time. So like literally when somebody clicks on a podcast on YouTube, I'll see a little like kind of blue line literally in that same exact second. It doesn't show me who it is. It doesn't show me where they're from. I just see somebody clicked on one of my videos. And in 2025, that got so addicting to just watch. It was like a bar chart, right? It would just go up and down. And on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, like it would just skyrocket. And I would just almost live and die by watching this chart go up and down. And I got so obsessed with trying to, grow my subscriber count and try to get as close as I could to, other top podcast in paintball. And I realized when I was putting focus there, it was starting to take my attention off of guests and starting to take my attention off of looking for stories because I was so worried about that. And so I think you've heard a lot of people in leadership or in business talk about it's where you're putting your mind and where you're putting your effort. And if you're putting it in one spot, something else has to give. And so that taught me that, wow, I'm spending so much energy just watching these numbers and almost stressing about them in a way that it was taking away from like a positive energy or positive effect I could be putting into these conversations and finding conversations. And so while it'll be a nice to have and it'll be great to continue to, grow the podcast, which I think will continue to grow organically, I'm going to take that energy for 2026 and put it where it really matters by asking some tougher questions and really driving home that human side of paintball. I think 2025 set the tone of going deeper in paintball. And for 2026, I want to make sure I'm going even deeper and asking some tougher questions. And so that's why, if you saw my episode last week, I'm going to change my style a little bit right at the beginning. I'm going to kind of remove some of the fluff of the intro and just jump right into the hard questions and jump right into the conversations, because when I'm watching a podcast, that's what I want to see. And so I want to create what I want to see. And then from that, I think a lot of really great things are going to happen. And so that brings me to the second point, and that second point is, what am I leaving, right? What am I leaving back in 2025? 2025 wrapped up um, recently, and what do I want to leave there? And so it's more of letting go of some conditionings and then setting some just proper intentions, right? So old expectations, like I just mentioned, not stressing over the numbers. That's obviously one, but I think talking specifically of why I'm leaving that in 2025, I think that definitely drove to some little spouts of burnout that I had throughout the year. And so I think by leaving that there and not focusing on the numbers as much, that'll definitely help the burnout stay low. People pleasing. Gosh, this was such a big classroom for me in 2025 and honestly in my whole entire life. I think I was taught or conditioned at a young age to my love language was to make sure everybody else was happy and to please other people. And I've just learned so much about how I'm putting all of my worth into other people. And I don't mean that in like a jerk way or my happiness is dependent on someone else's reaction. And if they aren't reacting in a certain way, then I feel a certain way. And so, I really want to leave that in 2025. I mentioned journaling a lot, and that's something that I've been working through. So it's just a shift in my love language. My obviously I've talked about her a lot on these episodes, but Amanda has helped me so much with breaking that. And with breaking that, it also has helped me unlock some of my self worth and some of my self value. Because I think we all have these conversations that we have with ourselves. Even if we don't know we're doing it, we're all having conversations with ourselves. And I think oftentimes a lot of those conversations aren't very nice ones. And I've realized a lot of my self talk or my self conversations weren't really the greatest because I was putting so much emphasis on other people and making sure that I was pleasing them or they were happy. And so that'll be a really nice change to leave that back. And then this next one, gosh, this was a big one. Saying yes too fast. This was such a good lesson for me. There were just so many times in 2025 where I said yes to opportunities without slowing down and thinking through what is the impact, short term, long term. And by saying yes, what does this mean? What am I committing to? What am I committing to for time, for value, for uh, can can I deliver on the commitment that I just said yes to? And so, by saying yes to everything, I just noticed that, wow, while I want to help everybody and help as much as I can, I started to feel almost suffocated in a way because I was setting these expectations that I could just help everything and help everybody and help all of the brands in paintball and help all of the pro teams with pictures that they need and players when they need stuff. And so what really brought this to a head was bringing my brand over to JT in 2025. And, I'm working on a little bit of a shorter episode. But I think I'm going to talk about why I left JT, because I've had a lot of questions about it. And it's not a bashing session. It's not, they did this wrong. I did that wrong. It's just more of why internally was that partnership, how could I have gone into that differently and what were my takeaways? So if that's an episode you'd like me to put out there, let me know in the comments below because I'm definitely working on that one. And then the last thing that I'm leaving in 2025 is no longer trying to chase validation and instead aligning myself with the correct values for myself. This was such a classroom for me that it's honestly been my whole entire life. And I think this last year really brought it up to the surface. I would put my validation everywhere else, like I had mentioned um, earlier with the photos. So I think going into 2026, I really want to do some internal work on finding how I can validate myself without looking for that external validation. And throughout the year, I've talked to a lot of people on this podcast that I think were also struggling with that as well. A lot of people, the top pros in the game, I think were struggling with some of this and still do. And that's okay. Some people don't want to change that. And some people, that's just their comfort level. And that's also okay. Um, but for me, I've realized that by putting my validation on everybody else, it almost creates this like anxiety inside because I'm always looking for it and I'm never really enjoying a moment. I'm never really in a present moment because I'm always looking for validation somewhere else. So, a lot of internal work for me in 2025. Obviously, writing a book was super vulnerable and that brought up a lot of the stuff that I had to face to get that book out there. And of course, dealing with the loss of my grandfather was a huge impact. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to close the chapter on 2025 and really step into the version I'm looking forward to becoming myself in 2026. And so, for the next point, the third topic that I want to talk about is what is this podcast becoming and what it's not becoming. Um, I think when I do a lot of research on YouTube and podcast and hosting, and I'm always trying to learn just how to improve myself and improve this podcast for you. And I watched something from two of my favorite podcast hosts at some point in the last few months. They were giving like almost a crash course to a different creator. And they asked that creator a question and it stumped that creator. And it made me think of this question, and I don't think I could answer it. And the question they asked is, who is the show for? Who is your audience? And I think the quick answer is, oh, well, it's, paintball players, right? That's the surface level answer. But then you can go a little deeper and say, well, it's tournament paintball players. And that's still, yes, those two are still right. But when I really dug into that question and thought of the root of what that answer is, um, I think it's deeper than that. I think this show is for people who care about why things happen in paintball and not just what happened, right? I think oftentimes if we focus on the why versus the what, that's where the depth comes out of, and it's not just drama, right? I heard a quote recently that drama travels fast and depth sticks. So anyone can react, but not everyone can listen. And so that really shaped, this audience. It shaped all of you. Of I think a lot of times it doesn't really matter who I have on, but it's really the why I have them on and what story that they have to share and why it's important to listen. And so it was just a really cool way for me to reframe how I'm looking into this podcast of thinking, who is this show for and what is the audience? And then, of course, there's always the flip side of that, right? Like, who is this podcast not for? And I really wanted to go down that path too. And when I was thinking of who is this podcast not for, if you're looking for, constant drama or hot takes, this show's probably not the best for you. And that's okay. There's definitely a platform out there for everybody. And so in 2026, I really want to really just double down on the depth and really double down on the core of why this podcast was started, and that's the why. Um, because I think when you ask that type of question, it just unlocks such a beautiful, powerful conversation for people when you ask somebody why. So the fourth point I want to talk about for this episode is what are the risks that I'm willing to take in 2026? Um, I've done so much in the photo space. I think now going on, gosh, I think it's 4 years. I've never missed a day where I have not posted a single photo, at least one photo every single day for 4 years. And so I have done a ton of growth in the photo space, but I think the podcast side is the next avenue that I really want to put more energy into. And I think, sorry, coming on a little bug. There's a little bit of a risk when that happens, right? And I mentioned this a little bit earlier. It's you're putting your energy in different buckets, and so for 2026, I really want to put more energy into the creative side of this. Like I had mentioned, I've been studying and taking a lot of different YouTube courses and just really learning the backside of YouTube of being a creator. And so I'm going to be trying some different editing techniques, framing episodes a little bit differently, and just really using this year of learning to see what's working and what's not working, what styles that I like. And so every few episodes, you might see something sprinkled in a little differently, or you might see something how I'm framing conversations in a different way. Um, because that's just how I want to continue to grow. And if we're consistently trying to seek something discomfortable, we're gonna find the best growth opportunities in that. And then the second risk, and this might be one of the biggest ones, is working on almost on an identity shift in a way. I think some would say this is maybe some life work right here, but it's similar to what I had mentioned. Um, this helps me approach conversations from just a completely different lens. I'll be looking at it from more of a curiosity lens and not a validation lens or looking for validation. And so this is one that I'm super excited about. And then whenever there's risk in anything, there's always the term scared comes up, or that's scary to take a risk. And so, when I was writing this episode, I wanted to think about like, well, what is scaring me in a way? And when I think about what scares me in a grounded way, um, I think, and this is a question that I've thought about a lot in the last year, and I think somebody in my Discord asked me about this, and I wanted to make sure I addressed it because this is something where if something is coming up, I don't want to just push it under the rug. I want to talk about it, right? Because these are a lot of questions that I have. It's similar to the Marcelo episode where I think we all were asking, and wondering what was going to happen to play the game, and wondering if Tyler and Marcelo were okay, but no one asked it, but we were all wondering it. And so when I have those type of questions that come up about myself, I want to make sure I talk about them because I think if I have them, other people have them too. And that question is, what if I run out of guests? What if I run out of interviewing top players in the league? And then what? This is definitely one that I've thought about. And honestly, I've toyed around with slowly expanding my show to bring in other guests outside of paintball. And before you cringe and like kind of pull back, um, there's a few reasons for that. And I think the first one is I think the more I think about the core of what my podcast is, it's depth in vulnerable conversations. And by stepping outside of paintball, it actually might help bring more eyes into paintball because they'll be looking into other shows, and if they're enjoying me as a creator and me as a host, they'll be interested in seeing what other episodes I've done. And so it might be a way to step out of the sport to bring people back into the sport in a way. So that's really scary to potentially think about that. Um, and I think whenever a creator does that, there's definitely an opportunity where they lose some of their audience, where people are not going to agree with it, and they unsubscribe or they leave, or they leave, some not nice comments. And I think that's natural if you're looking to grow. You're always going to have that transition period. I think a lot about gamers on YouTube, right? Where they're known for playing one game, maybe it's Call of Duty or Fortnite, and then they build a mass following. And then when they go to change to a different game, they go through almost an audience transition. And so that might be part of this too. And that's okay, because I think the conversations that we're having on this podcast are so valuable and so important that I think there's a way to reach a bigger audience while still bringing it back to the core of this, which is paintball. So a few risks I'm looking to potentially take in 2026. Okay, we've got a few more points. This one is, I titled this one, Why I'm Slowing Down to Go Further, right? It's almost the turtle analogy. You've got to slow down to win the race. And so for 2026, I'm looking at fewer partnerships, fewer brand deals. Instead of taking on the masses and working with a bunch of different companies, I really am only going to be working with a few companies so I can give them 100% of my attention and drive the best quality that I can, whether it's, photos on the field, it's content off the field, it's putting out, ads for the podcast. And then with the shift of energy, I really want to spend more time investing into this podcast. And so I might be doing less events for 2026. I think right now it's mapped out to where I will only be doing NXL events and maybe one USXBL event. And that just creates more space for more meaningful work. And by doing that, I think that'll help me juggle the burnout that I was struggling with last year of having to do all of it, having to juggle, gosh, what was it? 8 or 9 events, and then doing a guest every single week and never missing a week, and all of the photos and writing a book. It just became so much. And so all 3 of those things never got my full attention that it deserved. So looking back on some reflections on 2025, there were just so many moments that were not shared or not talked about that I think are going to live with me forever. I think one of the most impactful things that I had this year were at every single NXL event and the few USXBL events I went to, I had multiple people come up to me and just stop me and talk about how a certain episode impacted them and it changed their outlook on maybe the player, or they had a different respect for the player or the personality, or that the episode helped them unlock something that they want to change in themselves now. And so there were just so many of these quick, 30-second to 2-minute conversations of how this podcast has impacted people's lives. And the same thing with the book that I wrote and published. I had so many messages where people reached out and just said thank you of, hey, I'm struggling with this too. Or like, man, this imposter syndrome thing, I didn't really know what it was until you talked about it. I hope he's okay with me saying his name on here, but another photographer and just a great friend of mine, Almighty, He's a photographer out of Rhode Island and shoots at Matt's Outback Paintball a lot. He and I have just had a lot of really great in-depth conversations over the past year after he got his hands on my book, and he just realized that there was just so much vulnerability that we were holding inside that we were afraid to share. So I think there's just so much power in being vulnerable with somebody because then it allows them an opportunity to be vulnerable back with you. I think another lesson here, or another thing I learned in 2025 was just there were so many lessons that I didn't expect. I didn't expect to have as big as an impact as I did with these conversations. In 2025, I brought on Matt Soma, who's a referee on the pro field, and he travels all around to different events. And from that episode, 8 new referees applied to be referees. I think it was in Germany. And so that's mind blowing. From one conversation with somebody, 8 new people are now referees. And then from that, I think it was at the Texas event. A good friend of mine now, and his name is Matt. He's a Patreon and a subscriber of the episode. He's a referee out of Germany, and he talked about the impact of that episode now as well. And so it's crazy that these small conversations are now leading into, just potential career changes for people, and maybe those are small ways that actually grow paintball, for the future. Okay, I've got 2 points left. This next one is what does success look like for me now? This is a lot of like just redefining some work. I think I've mentioned it quite a bit throughout this episode so far, but the metrics don't tell a whole story. It was nice to have Marcelo and Mouse on back to back and get, thousands of views really instantly. Obviously, it hit the ego in a really good way and was really validating. But there's just so many other stories out there of people who are behind the scenes and even from the top personalities in our industry that have just never been told. I think a lot of times when I bring people on, a lot of their friends and their coworkers and their teammates will reach out and be like, "Hey, I've known this person for 20 years and I never knew this about them." And so regardless of the views, those are the stories that are worth telling because those stories are going to be cemented, online on YouTube forever, even past all of us when we're no longer here. These stories are going to mean so much to all of these players, families and friends and fans. So what does the fulfillment actually look like now? It's a question that it's an evolving answer. It used to be trophies. And if I win anything at the Summit Awards this year, like it's just going to be incredible. It's going to be such an amazing feeling of being in Tampa. At the first ever national event that I was at 20 years ago, to be back there 20 some odd years later, like it'll just be such a wild full circle moment. And I find so much fulfillment in bringing people on and just seeing, all the different sides of a player and a guest that comes on where they become nervous, they become excited, they become anxious. And then when we wrap up, there's just, "Hey, like, how did I do? Do you think I did okay?" And then I get to give them that gift of, "Hey, you know what? You crushed it. You did a really great job on this episode. And here's how and why I think it's going to impact people." And they just become so fulfilled with joy in that moment. And so it's just so cool to be able to give that gift back to other people. And it's a really fulfilling thing. Um, and then, success sometimes comes at a cost. And so I think there might be a cost of growth. If I do end up deciding to expand this thing outside of paintball, that'll obviously come with a cost. Some people might be angry and drop off and call me a sellout or whatever it is, but that also invites a new audience, and that invites, more people to potentially impact. And I think that's a spot where oftentimes creators struggle with, is stepping outside of those comfort zones, and they eventually keep themselves small. So let's wrap up with, why am I still here? And it all comes to purpose for me. You know, what does paintball still mean to me, and why is paintball still important? It means the world to me. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about it. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't post at least one thing related to paintball. Paintball has given me so much in my life, and to be able to give back to paintball and just leave it better than I found it, that's what drives me so much. You know, to think back of the last 4 years and think that there hasn't been a single day that I haven't posted something about paintball, that's a lot of eyes. That's a lot of people that are looking at paintball throughout the world. And that's really important. Um, and then why I'm still here is the story matters so much. I've always really enjoyed listening to stories and getting invested into stories, whether it's sports, TV shows, movies, other people's podcasts, or just life in general. So being in a sport where I can tell stories that will live forever, it's truly powerful, and I don't take that lightly. And then when I think of the why, why does this podcast exist? It's honestly needed. Paintball is such a masculine sport, if that's the right word, right? You need to literally mask up to shoot paintballs at somebody, and they hurt. And so you really need to like tap into something else in your brain, whether it's adrenaline. Um, and that's where a lot of like anger can come out. And that's great. That's needed for the sport, but we need to have a balance of it. And if there's one thing that I've learned, every single person that steps onto a field is carrying something, whether it's anxiety, stress, depression, comparing themselves, self doubt, worried about money or bills piling up, you name it. But knowing that is exactly why this podcast exists, because we are all going through something. Even if you think this person's on top of the world, they're still going through something. And so by me bringing people on and helping share their stories and helping bring out some of those personal vulnerabilities, that's exactly why this podcast exists and why it's going to continue to exist, because I'm going to dive deeper into that. And so 2026 is going to be an epic year. I really, really feel it. I feel it in my bones. There's just going to be some really powerful moments on this podcast with a lot of growth. A lot of opportunities are going to come from it. And so I just want to take a moment and say thank you. It's been just an incredible journey so far. And I really, really feel like we're just getting started. We've climbed a really small hill on this epic mountain. And I think 2026 is going to be just an epic year of climbing and growth in taking this podcast to new heights. And so with that, I'm excited for the rest of the year. If you have anything that you're looking forward to or any changes that you're working on personally, let me know in the comments below. It's always good to hear what other people are working on. But with that, I will see you next week for another episode of the Shellda podcast. See ya.